And we are live. Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? I've been looking forward to making this episode for a while now. We're in October. That means it's time for Halloween reads. So pay attention to this side of the screen where I'll be throwing up covers for some books that I wanted to share with you. I've got a list right here in my hot little hand. The only nonfiction right here is A Season of the Witch by J.W. Auker. Salem, Massachusetts, which had those famous witch trials in the late 1600s, is obviously known for that, but there's a lot more to the town than just that. And he not only covers that famous incident and the way that the town has leaned into that reputation since then, but he talks about similar areas in the region that had even bigger witch trials than Salem and maybe should be known for it, but aren't. Worth reading the book to check it out. He also spends a great deal of time talking about other attractions in the area, other museums that cover other events and other figures, and even specifically won't talk about the Salem witch trials just because, I mean, it's like going to Las Vegas and avoiding the strip and the casinos and stuff. It's like, obviously there's this one thing that they're known for, but there are some pockets of it that say, like, there's other stuff that's gone on here since then. I did think that it was cool that he shared pictures of the Hocus Pocus house. I guess that's where Disney filmed it back in the 90s. There's a real place. He talks about how the population will double or triple during the month of October as people go there to have a seasonal topical Halloween. Fascinating stuff, although at times trying to read it cover to cover got a little bit dry. Nevertheless, I gave it 3 stars, which is a recommendation. So that's A Season of the Witch. We'll go ahead and check that one off the list. The next one is Spell Check by Julie Wright. This was a fun romp of a YA novel that had a good atmosphere to it. Main character is a teen girl. She gets picked on by the other mean girls at school, not knowing that she's got latent witchcraft powers deep inside her. And when they pull a Halloween night prank on her, it activates these powers and she has to start learning how to navigate that, usually or mostly with the help of her grandmother, her Swedish grandmother. They call her Farmor. From what I understand from Swedish, that's a name that you have for a grandparent. Like far would be your father's father, Farmor is your father's mother, but she just calls her Farmor through the whole book. Interesting little touch. But it was a book that it knew when to be whimsical and when to be just a little bit zany, and also knew kind of when to play it straight and when to be serious. And it was a lot of fun. I've enjoyed reading it a couple of times over the years, and sometimes it's a matter of just striking that balance and getting it right. And Julie Wright did that very, very well. There's an entire series here which is not Halloween themed, but again, if we're talking about atmosphere, it hits that one really well. It's by Derek Landy and it's called Skullduggery Pleasant. I think we are up to 14 or 15 books in the series overall. Couldn't tell you how long he's been writing it. I've got a paperback of the first one on my shelf that I'm reading to my kids right now. But I first jumped into it a couple of years ago and had just great fun trying it out and seeing the world through the eyes of these zany characters that he'd invented. The main character is a teen girl named Stephanie, whose uncle was an eccentric mystery novelist. And he dies and leaves his entire estate to Stephanie. But there's more going on beneath the surface than she was aware. Her uncle was into some shady dealings with magical figures, and one of them was this eponymous character, a man who goes by the name of Skullduggery Pleasant. Turns out he's a wizard. These wizards all take on different names because naming conventions are mechanisms for power in the world, but she ends up teaming up with this wizard, and they have many wacky hijinks from then on. The series gets a lot more complicated as it goes. I remember kind of zoning out on part of the 4th book and having to go in or go back and reread huge sections of it because it just got a lot more complex, a lot more involved. But I've been grabbing one of them a year from the library and just getting through the next skullduggery adventure because Derek Landy is very good at humor as well as plot reveals and timing reveals and things of that nature. I'm up to the 5th one now, and that paperback that I have of the first, I'm reading it to my boys and they're getting a kick out of it. We've got 2 offerings from Ray Bradbury, The Halloween Tree and The October Country. The Halloween Tree, it fits very well into his Greentown type stories. He wrote these very poetic, very dramatic kind of love letters to the town that he grew up in, Waukegan, Illinois, but he called it Greentown. And Halloween Tree was no exception. He wrote Dandelion Wine and Farewell Summer, which I've covered on this channel, but Halloween Tree is kind of the October story. It's about a bunch of boys that are, they're just completely in love with Halloween. They're getting dressed up, they're getting ready to go trick-or-treating, and they go to pick up one of their friends, and it turns out he's sick, and they think that he's gonna die. And then they're all visited by this mysterious figure named Mr. Moundshroud, and he takes them on a journey around the world to show them how different cultures celebrate festivals centered on death. And at the end, he gives the boys a choice to shorten their own lives in order to extend the life of their friend. Not only is it an interesting examination of things like Dia de los Muertos in Mexico and Samhain among the Celtic cultures, it's a very touching story about the friendship and loyalty that young boys have together, especially in small towns like this. His other one, The October Country, is a collection of short stories, and caveat, I have not finished reading all of them. It's one of those books where I dip into it and read a couple of stories per year at Halloween, but I haven't finished them all. It's just a collection of these little snippets of a dive into the macabre corners of Ray Bradbury's imagination, and he's just able to do kind of gothic horror so well with such a limited amount of space, and man, that's really all I can say about it. The October Country, if you want a bunch of short stories that you can just dip in and dip out and kind of have your mind blown and get into that kind of creepy crawly feeling that the season demands of us, then that's a great way to do it. I've also got, in that same vein, The Savage Tales of Solomon Kane by Robert E. Howard. This is another one that I haven't finished all the way through, kind of because the stories will touch on a lot of similar elements and have a similar tone and maybe even similar outcomes, but reading a couple of them a year is very enjoyable. Robert E. Howard was a guy who, walked the walk. He wrote stories that were savage and brutal and tough and intense. He's the guy who created Conan the Barbarian. Solomon Kane is one of his lesser known characters. He's this Puritan do-gooder who just travels the world, has no home, finds evil, kills it, and that's that. And so, with that being the main mechanism of Solomon Kane stories, you can see why they come off as a little bit repetitive, but the reader is benefited by just dipping in and out of them and reading a couple of them a year, as I have. And atmosphere is a word you're going to hear me say a lot, because reading stories like this, it's like the literary version of putting up some orange lights and some pumpkins in the corner. It's a decoration that amplifies the mood. Another one here, which is a Halloween story, is actually the 7th in a series. If you're familiar with Harry Dresden, it's a series by Jim Butcher, who writes about this wizard who's a private eye in modern-day Chicago. Whenever there are weird goings-on that the Chicago PD can't solve, they call up Harry Dresden, and he tries to find out if there's something magical or supernatural at the root of it. Deadbeat is the 7th book in this series, and it's a story that mostly takes place on Halloween night. There's a necromancer going around raising the dead and causing all sorts of trouble, and doing it in a way that Harry's getting blamed for it. And Harry's got to find this guy and go toe-to-toe with him. There is a 3rd act reveal that just blew my mind the first time I read it, 10 or 11 years ago. I thought, like, this is just awesome. I want to be able to do something as cool as what Jim Butcher did in Deadbeat. I'm not going to say what it was, because I think that you should jump into it and see. And it's the kind of series that, with some of these serialized books where you got book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's a longer story playing out in each installation, but each installation is a self-contained story. As interesting as it is to know all the back details, leading up to this particular adventure, you can skip it and just jump right into Deadbeat if you need to. It's just awesome. If I talk anymore, I'm going to give away what that third act twist was, but worth it. The Courtney Crummer series by Ted Naife, I hope I'm saying that name right. This is a series of graphic novels that one of them came in on a library hold that I'd set up 3 years ago, and I didn't remember setting the hold, and I remembered somebody mentioning the series but couldn't remember who. It was a little bit spooky in its own right. But this has been an excellent series to read. I blew through all 6 books, and I've been collecting them in hardcover from my own library. It's just such a perfect blend of magical realism and original storytelling. Courtney is this young girl whose family has to move in with her weird, eccentric Uncle Aloysius. She finds out he's into magic. She starts studying magic, but it isn't just some happy little Disney Channel adventure where everything is turnkey, you flip a page, something cool happens, yada, yada, yada. Like, there are dire consequences for her farting around with magic and not being able to handle it properly. She gets into agreements with demons and witches, and somebody has to come bail her out, and it'll be at great cost to them. He takes this concept and this aesthetic that is normally toned down to being something very playful for young children, but he treats it very seriously. And the art is very fun to boot. And in the hardcover editions that I have, they are colorized, but it's not to say that there's a big explosive full color palette. It's still very, kind of gothic toned. You stay on the cool side of the color palette, and it was just a fun read to race through the first time that I did, and I look forward to October coming around every year so I can grab one of the Courtney Crummer books and check it out again. I've got 2 offerings now from the author Tim Powers, and these are books that are more adult, not necessarily because of rough content or anything, but more because they are a slow burn. He is an author that demands attention of the reader. You've got to really be paying attention to what's going on as far as the setting and characters mentioning this or that, and you've really got to be keyed into what their motives are in order to understand what they're about. The first book I'm going to read off here is called Alternate Routes, which I've plugged on the channel before, I think 4 years ago, before I had any real following. This is a book that, what can I say without giving it all away? It's just a head wrecker. I don't know what made Tim Powers sit down and say, I'm going to take this, and this, and combine it and come up with this story. But he did. The main character is a guy who used to be Secret Service, and now he's persona non grata. The government's still hunting him. He's hiding out in LA, working for a highway patrol, or not highway patrol, Adopt a Highway. His job is picking up litter on the shoulder of the LA freeway system. And he's doing this because the LA freeway system is actually a circuit to the underworld. And people can sometimes accidentally find themselves on an off-ramp that takes them straight into hell. And he's trying to figure out how all that works, and he's trying to correct something from his past that went wrong. It's got to do with why the government is hunting him. And that's all I'm going to say. Tim Powers, like I said, he'll punish the uncommitted reader, because you could just be kind of lazily flipping pages, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, what the heck's going on? And you go back and you realize okay, this conversation was more important in this way. This is what was going on here. He doesn't sit there and spell everything out to you in minute detail like some authors will, but if you read it and you're paying attention, you'll understand what's going on. It seems like a real revolutionary way to read a book, right? But Alternate Routes was a very creepy ghost world, underworld type story that I'm talking myself into going back and rereading it now, and I think he's written a sequel to it since then. The other one is called The Stress of Her Regard. Takes place about 200 years ago. And, some gothic English countryside bro is about to get married, but he's having a bachelor party in some small village, and goes out, gets drunk with the guys. He's got the wedding ring in his pocket. He goes and, while he's out cavorting through the town, he puts the wedding ring on the ring finger of a statue in the town square, not knowing that he accidentally committed himself to the spirit of a witch, a lamia, in this rite, and now the witch comes to life and wants to kill anybody who's going to get in the way of him being together with her. Very creepy book. Plenty of famous real-world poets come to life in the story, and man, that one really, really pulled me in. Tim Powers kind of has a rule for writing where if he's tying some of his fiction to real-world events, he doesn't allow himself to change anything that's established in the historical record. He has to write his story in a way that it fits all those events, fills in gaps that we might not know, and then makes sense on its own. And so that's why when he ties in real figures like Keats or was it Keating? I can't remember which one, but some of these other famous poets and writers of the time, it just makes it that much creepier knowing, like, shoot, the way that he wrote this, it probably could have happened. So check out Tim Powers and his writing generally, but these two titles specifically. I'm going to close it out with a recommendation from Washington Irving, who I know 5 or 6 months ago I streamed that I was going to be reading a little bit more of his stuff on the channel. Frankly, I thought that my readings of What So Proudly We Hail were going to go a little bit quicker, but life happened, as it tends to, so I haven't done that yet, but I've still got plans to do that down the road. But Washington Irving is, without a doubt, most famous for his piece, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which I had seen different screen treatments of it over the years, but didn't really sit down to read that piece of writing until 10 years ago. It was October of 2012, actually. I was on a flight to Texas, and I was reading it on my Nook, because that's what I did back then. And not only was I impressed by the picture that he painted of the old Dutch New York countryside and these three figures whose lives were intertwined in 1790, that being Ichabod Crane, Brom Bones, Katrina von Tassel. I was very smitten with his prose, just the way that he used his words to paint that picture. I was also very impressed by the fact that Hollywood always gets this story wrong. Like, I've seen 3 different screen treatments of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, 4 actually. The first one was that Disney cartoon that if you got Disney Plus, it's on there. It's like Mr. Toad and Ichabod Crane or something. Like, half of the cartoon is The Wind in the Willows and the other half is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And that one is a very faithful adaptation of the story as Washington Irving told it. Ichabod Crane is a guy who comes to Sleepy Hollow. He's the local school teacher. He ingratiates himself with all the families that have small children because their moms are good cooks. And then there's, one pretty girl who's kind of a ditzy little flirt, and she's the daughter of a very rich farmer. All the guys want her. Ichabod wants her. She's kind of interested in Ichabod, but the local big buff guy, tough guy, Brom Bones, really wants her. And so in an unspoken way, Brom and Ichabod are in open war for Katrina von Tassel. And Ichabod is the smarter one, Brom is the tougher one, but Ichabod's crucial flaw is that he is superstitious. Brom's also the handsome one, and Ichabod looks really goofy. He's got the long neck, the long nose, the goofy ears, and Irving spares no verbiage to describe his, we'll say, unattractive physical appearance, especially when compared to Brom. But Ichabod is very superstitious, and Brom knows this, and he's able to play on those superstitions to scare Ichabod out of town so he can get the girl. Without reading the story, you could be forgiven for thinking that Ichabod Crane is the hero of it and that he comes off conqueror because, hey, that's how these stories work, right? Wrong, and that's not how Irving wrote it, and that's not how my imagination has played with it over the last 10 years. But you can check out that cartoon. I highly recommend you read the book. As far as adaptations that have come since then, there was a 1999 Tim Burton movie with Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci. And then there was that 2013 TV show that ran for a couple of seasons with Tom Mison. Both of those productions cast like this sexy debonair guy to play Ichabod Crane, and that really defeats the entire purpose of his character and his role in the story. He wasn't supposed to be a good-looking guy. That wasn't the strength that he had in his corner, and it ultimately didn't save him from his downfall. But go read that, and as a final note here, I'm going to plug my own Halloween book, which ties in quite directly with The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and I have aptly named it Sleepless Hollow. This was a book that I was inspired to write something in this vein for a very long time. I wanted to write a spooky book, a Halloween book, a ghost book, and obviously after I read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, my imagination was just completely tickled and taken with it. But I didn't know what to do. This is a book that I kind of false started on several times over the years. The first draft that I wrote was in 2014, and I didn't get it right and published until 2019. And it took a lot of things happening in my life and a lot of things contributing to it in my imagination to make it work right. But the central conceit of it is that in modern day Sleepy Hollow, there's a girl named Josie Penninger. She's in her early 20s. She can see ghosts, but she tries not to talk about it because she doesn't want to cause problems for herself. She doesn't want people to think that she's crazy. What she doesn't know is that there is one particular ghost in Sleepy Hollow who is interested in protecting her, but also is very much trying to keep himself hidden from her. And then on the Halloween night in 2020, keep in mind, I wrote this book in 2019 but set it in 2020 because that was 200 years after the publication of the original legend. It was an anniversary. The book doesn't have anything about COVID-19 in it or race riots or any election chicanery or any of that, which is fine. It's nice to be free from that. The focus of it is this big 200th anniversary celebration, and what Josie doesn't know is that there is a ghost who has a mechanism in place to force his way back onto the mortal plane, back into mortality, and he's going to do it, and he's going to trap everybody in Sleepy Hollow, in under this kind of shield dome, and he's going to drag their brains for energy so that he can power a time machine to go back to 1790 and change the way that the legend played out. Based on that premise alone, I think you can guess who the ghost, or guess who the ghost is. Pardon me, it's late. But Josie and her guardian ghost then kind of have to team up to figure out how to thwart this guy, because if you change something in the past from 230 years ago, it's obviously going to have dire repercussions for the present, and they can't let that happen. So this is one of the books that I am most proud of. It was the most fun that I had writing and illustrating, and in a future episode I'm going to cover the illustrations that I did for it. I think I ended up drawing 10 or 12 pieces. I'm going to be doing a few more videos about my drawings and the process behind creating them, but yeah, it's been one of my favorite books to write, which you would think that a writer loves every piece that he creates, and I do, but this is the one that it's like having a child that you're more proud of than the other ones, and this one definitely qualifies. So if you would be so kind, and if you're interested at all in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, I hope you'll check out this unofficial sequel that I wrote to it. I doubt the Irving estate is going to come sue me because that book is in the public domain, yada, yada, yada. As a final note, one guiding principle that I had in writing it was that I wasn't going to subvert or change anything about the story as Irving wrote it. Everything that happens in Sleepless Hollow is dependent on Irving's tale and doesn't do anything to alter the ultimate outcome of it. I will say this, the guardian ghost that Josie has, his name is Silas Proctor. His unique contribution to The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is that, if you're familiar with it, the Headless Horseman, the big bad ghost in it, Irving has this throwaway line that he was a Hessian rider who lost his head to a cannonball during some unnamed battle in the American Revolution. The way that I wrote it, Silas Proctor is the revolutionary soldier who lit that cannon and killed the horseman. So there's some beef there as well. That was the initial basis for the introduction of his character. So that's it for now. Thanks guys for watching 25 minutes of this. I hope I've given you something that you're interested in, that you'll read for Halloween. Let me know what you think. And by all means, if you go to your local library or bookstore and pick one of these up and read it, go ahead and report back and we'll get a discussion going. You guys know the drill. Till then, drive safe. See you out there.